My husband brought his new Italian partner to our anniversary dinner. He warned me, "She doesn't speak English, so just smile and eat." I nodded, playing the clueless housewife. They spent the night flirting in Italian, mocking my dress and my age. I kept eating silently, but when he whispered, "Once she signs the papers tomorrow, her money is yours." I haven't spoken Italian since college, but I looked at them and said, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Deanna, and I'm 63 years old. I never imagined that my 38th wedding anniversary would be the night I watched my husband plan to steal my inheritance while flirting with his mistress right in front of me. The reservation at La Bella Vista was for 7:30. Jared had insisted on this particular restaurant, claiming it was romantic, but I should have known better. He'd been acting strange for months, taking calls in his study with the door locked, coming home late from business meetings, and most telling of all, suddenly showing interest in my mother's properties in Italy. I arrived first, as always. The hostess led me to our usual corner table, the one with the view of Hartford's twinkling skyline. The familiar sense of garlic and basil filled the air, along with the gentle murmur of conversations in Italian from nearby tables. I ordered a glass of Chianti and waited, unconsciously touching the small Italian-English dictionary I always kept in my purse, a habit from my college years in Rome that I'd never quite shaken. Jared walked in at 7:45 with her. She was stunning, I'll give him that. Tall, elegant, with the kind of effortless beauty that comes from good genes and expensive maintenance. Her black hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and she wore a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. When Jared introduced her as Andrea Rossi, his new Italian business partner, I felt my stomach drop, though I kept my smile perfectly in place. "Deanna, this is Andrea," Jared said, his hand lingering on her lower back in a way that made my chest tight. "She doesn't speak much English, so just smile and eat, okay?" I nodded, playing the role he expected, the dutiful wife who wouldn't ask questions. They sat across from me, and immediately began speaking in rapid Italian. Jared's Italian was terrible, choppy and heavily accented, but Andrea was patient with him, touching his hand when he struggled with pronunciation. I sipped my wine and pretended to study the menu while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Lei è più vecchia di quanto pensassi," Andrea said with a small laugh, glancing at me. "She's older than I thought." Jared chuckled, cutting into his osso buco. "E anche più ingenua. Non ha idea di niente." And more naive, too. She has no idea about anything. I kept eating my risotto, each spoonful feeling like sawdust in my mouth. "Il vestito che indossa," Andrea continued, gesturing subtly toward my navy blue dress. "Sembra che l'abbia comprato in un negozio dell'usato." "The dress she's wearing looks like she bought it at a thrift shop." They both laughed softly, and Jared reached over to squeeze Andrea's hand. I focused on my plate, remembering my mother teaching me Italian when I was 7, the 2 years I spent in Rome during college, the poetry I used to recite in perfect Tuscan accent. They had no idea. "Quando firmerà I documenti domani?" Andrea asked, her voice dropping slightly. "When will she sign the documents tomorrow?" Jared glanced around nervously before answering. "Domani pomeriggio. Le ho detto che sono per semplificare I nostri investimenti." "Tomorrow afternoon. I told her they're to simplify our investments." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "Documents? What documents?" "Perfetto," Andrea purred, running her finger along the rim of her wineglass. "Una volta che avrà firmato le procure, tutto sarà nostro. La villa, il vigneto, tutto. Perfect. Once she signs the power of attorney papers, everything will be ours. The villa, the vineyard, everything." The room seemed to tilt. My mother's properties. The ones she'd left to me when she died 9 years ago. The ones I'd barely visited because the memories were too painful. Jared knew how much they meant to me, knew they were my last connection to her. "E dopo?" Andrea asked. "And then?" Jared's voice dropped to a whisper, but I caught every word. Dopo ci liberiamo di lei. Divorzio per abbandono del tetto coniugale. Terrà solo I debiti. After that, we get rid of her. Divorce for abandoning the marital home. She'll only keep the debts. I reached for my water glass with a hand I willed to remain steady. 38 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. Not with a fight or growing apart, but with cold, calculated theft. Sei sicuro che non capisce? Andrea asked, eyeing me suspiciously. Are you sure she doesn't understand? Jared waved dismissively. Diana, per favore, non sa nemmeno ordinare un caffè in italiano. Diana, please. She can't even order coffee in Italian. I smiled at them both, raising my wine glass. This is lovely, I said in my most pleasant voice. Thank you for including me in your business dinner. Andrea relaxed visibly, and Jared patted my hand condescendingly. Of course, sweetheart. Andrea was just telling me about some investment opportunities in Tuscany. Investment opportunities. In my own inheritance. They continued their conversation, growing bolder with their comments about my appearance, my intelligence, even speculating about how quickly they could access my bank accounts once the papers were signed. With each cruel word, something inside me crystallized. Not anger exactly, but something colder, clearer. When dessert arrived, tiramisu that I couldn't taste, Andrea leaned closer to Jared and whispered, Domani sera celebriamo. Ho prenotato la suite al Marriott. Tomorrow night we celebrate. I've booked the suite at the Marriott. Jared's eyes lit up, and he brought her hand to his lips, kissing it softly. Right there, in front of me. I excused myself to the ladies' room, where I gripped the marble counter and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me had silver-streaked hair, laugh lines that had come from 38 years of loving a man who was planning to destroy her, and eyes that had just seen the truth. But she also had something Jared and Andrea didn't know about. She had secrets of her own. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in months. Giuseppe Martinelli, the caretaker of my mother's villa in Montalcino. A man who'd been sending me careful, respectful emails for years about property maintenance, and who'd mentioned, more than once, strange inquiries about the ownership of the land. I typed quickly, Giuseppe, I'm coming to Italy soon. Can you meet me at the villa? There are some documents I need to review. And, Giuseppe, if anyone else asks about the property, please don't share any information. Trust me on this. His response came within minutes. Signora Diana, I've been waiting for your call. There are things you need to know. I'll be ready. When I returned to the table, Jared and Andrea were sharing a piece of chocolate cake, feeding each other with the intimacy of lovers. They barely noticed I'd been gone. Ready to go home? Jared asked, signaling for the check. Yes, I said, gathering my purse and touching the dictionary one more time. I'm very ready. As we walked to our cars, Andrea had driven separately, of course. She kissed Jared goodbye on both cheeks, European style, but her lips lingered near his mouth just long enough to make her intentions clear. Ci vediamo domani, she said, looking directly at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. See you tomorrow. I smiled back, my voice warm and innocent. It was so nice meeting you, Andrea. I hope we'll be seeing much more of each other. If only she knew how much I meant those words. If only she knew that tomorrow would be nothing like what she and my husband had planned. The drive home was silent. Jared hummed softly to himself, probably thinking about his celebration at the Marriott tomorrow night. I stared out the window at the familiar Connecticut suburbs, at the life I'd built for 38 years, and began planning how to save everything that mattered. Because unlike what they thought, I wasn't just Deanna, the naive housewife who couldn't order coffee in Italian. I was Deanna Castellano-Williams, who'd graduated magna cum laude from the University of Florence, who'd once given a presentation on Dante's Inferno to a room full of Italian professors, and whose mother had left her not just property, but a legacy of strength I was finally ready to claim. Tomorrow, Jared and Andrea would learn exactly who they'd been underestimating, and they would learn it in perfect Italian. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Andrea's voice saying, "Ci liberiamo di lei." We get rid of her. 38 years of marriage, and my husband was planning to discard me like yesterday's newspaper. Jared slept soundly beside me, snoring softly the way he had for decades. Amazing how someone could sleep so peacefully while plotting to destroy their spouse's life. I watched the digital clock change from 2:17 a.m. to 3:45 a.m. to 5:23 a.m., my mind racing with questions and plans. At 6 a.m., Jared's alarm buzzed. He rolled over, kissed my forehead with the same casual affection he'd shown for years, and headed to the shower. "Big day today," he called over the sound of running water. "Lots of paperwork to get through." Yes, I thought. Lots of paperwork, the kind that would steal my mother's legacy and leave me with nothing. After he left for his office at 8:30, claiming he needed to prepare documents for our meeting, I began my own investigation. I started in his study, a room I rarely entered anymore. It used to be our shared space when we were younger. I'd grade papers at the small desk while he worked on his accounting business at the larger one. But over the years, it had become his private domain. The room smelled like his cologne and old leather. His desk was meticulously organized, as always, but something felt different. I opened drawers carefully, looking for anything related to Italy or Andrea. In the bottom drawer, tucked behind a stack of old tax returns, I found it. A folder labeled Italian Properties D. Williams. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were copies of documents I'd never seen before. Property assessments for my mother's villa and vineyard, recent photographs of the buildings, and most shocking of all, a letter from an Italian law firm dated 3 months ago. The letter was in Italian, discussing transfer procedures and foreign property acquisition protocols. But it was the handwritten notes in Jared's messy scrawl that made my blood run cold. Villa current value, approximately $1.2 million. Vineyard, $600,000. Total assets, over $1.8 million. Andrea confirms Italian law allows spousal property transfer with proper documentation. Below that, in red ink, power of attorney documents ready. D signs tomorrow. Transfer complete within 30 days. I photographed every page with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several shots. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. This was a calculated months-long plan to steal my inheritance. The second shock came when I found Andrea's real business card tucked behind the legal documents. Not the simple white card she'd given Jared at the restaurant, but an expensive embossed one that read, Andrea Rossi, International Property Consultant, with a Milan address. On the back, in Jared's handwriting, previous clients, Margaret Hoffman, Chicago, Ruth Patterson, Boston, Elena Vasquez, Miami. A property consultant who specialized in targeting American women with Italian inheritances. My stomach lurched as I realized I wasn't Jared's first victim. I was just his latest. I quickly searched online for the names Jared had written down. What I found made me sick. Margaret Hoffman, 72, of Chicago, had lost a $2 million villa in Lake Como after her husband of 45 years convinced her to sign tax simplification documents. The divorce papers were filed 2 weeks later. Margaret died in a nursing home 8 months after losing everything. Ruth Patterson, 68, of Boston, had inherited olive groves in Calabria from her grandmother. Her husband and his Italian business partner convinced her to streamline the property management. She ended up homeless, living with her daughter. Elena Vasquez, 61, of Miami, had trusted her husband of 32 years to handle the paperwork for her family's Sicilian vineyard. She discovered the betrayal only when Italian authorities contacted her about unpaid property taxes on land that was no longer legally hers. I printed every article, every court document I could find. Andrea Rossi wasn't just a mistress. She was a professional predator who specialized in destroying marriages and stealing inheritances. And Jared wasn't a cheating husband who'd lost his way. He was an active participant in a con game that had already destroyed at least 3 other women's lives. The phone rang, startling me out of my research. Jared's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, honey," he said, his voice warm with false affection. "Just wanted to confirm our meeting at 2 p.m. The lawyer's office is on Main Street, Suite 407. Bring your driver's license and social security card, okay?" "Of course," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. "Should I bring anything else?" "Nope, just yourself. This is just to simplify our investment portfolio, make everything easier to manage. You know I only want what's best for us." Us. As if there was still an us in his mind. After hanging up, I called the law office he'd mentioned. "Hello, I'm Deanna Williams. My husband Jared scheduled an appointment for us today at 2 p.m., but I wanted to confirm what documents we'll be signing." The receptionist sounded confused. "Mrs. Williams? I don't show any appointment under that name. Are you sure you have the right office?" My heart pounded. "Let me double-check the address. Suite 407 on Main Street? That's us, but we definitely don't have any Williams appointments today. In fact, we specialize in immigration law, not financial planning." I thanked her and hung up. So Jared was planning to take me somewhere else entirely. Somewhere without official records. Somewhere Andrea could witness my signature on documents that would steal everything my mother had left me. That's when I remembered Giuseppe's email from months ago, the one I'd barely paid attention to at the time. He'd mentioned that someone claiming to be my husband had contacted him about selling the property. I'd assumed it was a scam, and told Jared about it, laughing at how bold thieves had become. Jared had laughed too, saying we should be more careful about protecting our information. Now I realized Giuseppe had been trying to warn me. I found his email and read it carefully. "Signora Diana, a man claiming to be your husband called asking about selling the villa. He knew many details about the property, but something felt wrong. He spoke no Italian and seemed surprised when I mentioned the olive harvest. Your mother always said the olive grove was your favorite part of the land. I told him nothing, but I wanted you to know. Giuseppe had protected me even when I didn't know I needed protection." I spent the rest of the morning preparing. I called my bank and put a security hold on all our joint accounts, requiring both signatures for any withdrawals over $500. I contacted my financial advisor and moved my individual retirement account to a new institution. I even called a locksmith to have the locks changed on our house, scheduled for tomorrow morning while Jared would be at his celebration. Most importantly, I booked a flight to Italy. Not for next week or next month, but for tomorrow night. If Jared wanted to play games with my inheritance, he would discover that I'd been playing chess while he was still learning checkers. At noon, I received a text from Andrea. "Looking forward to meeting you again today, Mrs. Williams. Thank you for being so understanding about our business relationship." I stared at the message for a long moment, then replied, "The pleasure is all mine. I can't wait to show you exactly how understanding I can be." By 1 p.m., I had gathered everything I needed, copies of all the evidence I'd found, my mother's original will proving sole inheritance, my passport, and most importantly, the phone number for Giuseppe Martinelli, who was expecting my call. I dressed carefully for our 2 o'clock meeting, wherever it was really going to be. I chose my navy blue suit, the one my mother had helped me pick out for my first job interview 40 years ago. She always said it made me look powerful and confident. Today, I would need both. As I was getting ready to leave, I found myself standing in front of the mirror in our bedroom, the bedroom I'd shared with Jared for nearly 4 decades. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same person who'd sat silently at La Bella Vista last night. She was someone who'd just discovered she'd been living a lie, but she was also someone who'd decided to fight back. I touched the gold locket at my throat, the one with my mother's picture inside. "I won't let them take what you left me, Mama," I whispered in Italian. "Ti prometto. I promise." My phone buzzed with another text from Jared. Running a few minutes late. Meet you at the office at 2:15 instead. I typed back, no problem, take your time. But I wasn't planning to meet him at any office. I had my own appointment to keep, with the truth. As I drove toward downtown Hartford, I thought about the 3 women who'd been destroyed by Andrea's scheme. Margaret, who'd died alone in a nursing home. Ruth, who'd lost her family's legacy. Elena, who'd trusted the wrong person and paid with everything she owned. They hadn't known what was coming. They hadn't been able to protect themselves. But I did know, and I was going to make sure that Jared and Andrea learned exactly what happened when they targeted the wrong woman. The game was about to begin, and for the first time in months, I held all the cards. Instead of driving to meet Jared at his fake appointment, I drove straight to the Hartford Public Library. If Andrea Rossi was a professional con artist, there would be more evidence online than what I'd found in 20 minutes at home. I needed to understand exactly who I was dealing with before I walked into whatever trap they'd set for me. The library's computer lab was nearly empty at 2 in the afternoon. I settled into a corner workstation and began what would become the most important research of my life. What I discovered over the next 3 hours changed everything I thought I knew about my situation. Andrea Rossi wasn't just targeting random American women with Italian inheritances. She was part of a sophisticated network of international property fraud specialists. Her LinkedIn profile, which she'd carefully crafted to look legitimate, showed connections to lawyers in Milan, Rome, and Naples, all of whom specialized in expedited property transfers for foreign nationals. But it was the deeper dive into court records that revealed the true scope of her operation. In the past 5 years, Andrea had been involved in at least 12 cases of inheritance fraud across 3 countries. The pattern was always the same. Identify wealthy American widows or wives with Italian property, seduce their husbands, or find husbands willing to participate for a cut of the profits, then use carefully forged power of attorney documents to steal everything. The most chilling discovery came when I found a blog post written by Elena Vasquez's daughter, Maria. She'd written about her mother's case in excruciating detail, hoping to warn other families. According to Maria, her stepfather had been having an affair with Andrea for over a year before they made their move on her mother's Sicilian vineyard. The theft was so perfectly orchestrated that by the time Elena realized what had happened, the property had already been sold to a shell company controlled by Andrea's network. My mother trusted him completely, Maria had written. She signed those papers thinking she was helping their marriage by simplifying their finances. Instead, she signed away 4 generations of family history. The worst part? When she confronted him, he acted like she was crazy. He gaslighted her so effectively that she started to doubt her own memory of what she'd signed. I printed Maria's blog post and several others from Andrea's victims. Each story followed the same devastating pattern: trust, manipulation, theft, abandonment, and finally, the complete destruction of women who'd simply wanted to believe their husbands loved them. But there was one difference in my case that gave me hope. Unlike the other women, I'd discovered the plan before signing anything. I still had time to protect myself. My phone buzzed constantly with increasingly frantic messages from Jared. "Where are you? The lawyer is waiting." "Deanna, this is important. We need to sign these papers today." "I'm getting worried. Please call me back." "The appointment is at a different location. Meet me at the Marriott downtown, conference room B." They had to move the meeting at the last minute. The Marriott, the same hotel where Andrea had booked their celebration suite. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. Instead of responding to Jared, I called Giuseppe in Italy. Despite the time difference, it was past 8 p.m. in Tuscany. He answered immediately. "Signora Deanna," his warm voice came through clearly. "I've been expecting your call." "Giuseppe, I need to ask you some difficult questions about the property. Has anyone else been inquiring about ownership or trying to get information about the villa?" His sigh was heavy with concern. "Si, signora. Many calls in the past few months. A woman claiming to be your daughter, asking about selling quickly. A man saying he was your lawyer, wanting copies of all property documents. Another woman, this one with a very strong Milan accent, asking about the value of the olive groves. My chest tightened. What did you tell them? Nothing, Signora. Your mother made me promise years ago that I would only discuss the property with you directly. She was very specific about this, she said. He paused, as if remembering something painful. She said there might come a day when people would try to trick me, and I should trust only you. My mother had known. Somehow she'd anticipated that someone might try to steal what she'd left me. Giuseppe, I need to come to Italy immediately, tonight if possible. Can you meet me at the villa tomorrow? Of course, Signora. But are you in trouble? I looked around the library, at the evidence I'd printed, at the messages from my husband demanding I meet him at a hotel to sign away my birthright. Yes, Giuseppe, I am, but not for much longer. Then you should know. His voice dropped to a whisper. Your mother left something for you. Hidden in the villa. She made me promise to show it to you only if you came to Italy alone, without your husband. She said you would understand when the time was right. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of something? Letters, Signora, and documents. She said they would protect you if anyone ever tried to take what was rightfully yours. My mother, who'd died 9 years ago, was still trying to protect me. I felt tears burning my eyes as I realized how much she'd understood about the dangers of trusting the wrong people with family legacy. I'll be there tomorrow evening, Giuseppe. And Giuseppe, if anyone else calls asking about me or the property, I know nothing, Signora. I have always known nothing. After hanging up, I went to the travel agency next door to the library. Yes, travel agencies still existed, and sometimes they were the best option when you needed to book international flights without leaving a digital trail your husband could follow. I need a flight to Rome tonight, I told the agent, a middle-aged woman who looked like she'd helped people escape complicated situations before. Tonight? That's going to be expensive and difficult. Most flights to Rome leave in the morning. Money isn't an object. I need to leave as soon as possible. She typed rapidly on her computer. There's a KLM flight through Amsterdam that leaves at 11:45 p.m. You'd arrive in Rome tomorrow evening around 6:30 local time, but it's going to cost almost $4,000 for business class. Book it. As she processed my credit card, my personal card that Jared had no access to, I felt a strange sense of calm descending over me. For months, I'd been reactive, trying to understand why my husband was behaving strangely, why he seemed distant, why he was suddenly so interested in my Italian properties. Now I was taking action. My phone rang again. Jared's name flashed on the screen. This time I answered. Deanna, where the hell are you? We've been waiting for over an hour. We? I asked innocently. The lawyer and I, for the investment paperwork. Remember? Oh, Jared, I'm so sorry. I got confused about the location. You said Suite 407 on Main Street, but when I called to confirm, they said they didn't have any appointment for us. Silence. I could practically hear him scrambling for an explanation. There must have been some miscommunication. We're at the Marriott now, conference room B. Can you come here? Of course, honey. I'll be right there. But instead of driving to the Marriott, I went home. I had packing to do and final preparations to make before my flight. I also had one more crucial phone call to make. I dialed the number for Maria Vasquez, Elena's daughter, whose blog post had revealed so much about Andrea's methods. Hello? Ms. Vasquez, this is Deanna Williams. I know this is going to sound strange, but I believe the woman who destroyed your mother's life is now targeting me. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Then, Andrea Rossi? Yes. How did you know? Because you're the fourth woman who's called me in the past 2 years. She's like a plague, moving from victim to victim. Are you married? 38 years. And your husband suddenly has a new Italian business partner who doesn't speak much English? My blood turned to ice. Yes. Then you need to run. Tonight. Don't sign anything. Don't trust anything he says. And don't think you can outsmart them together. My mother thought she could reason with my stepfather. Thought their marriage meant something to him. She died believing it was somehow her fault. I'm not running, I said quietly. I'm fighting back. How? I looked at my packed suitcase, at the evidence I'd gathered, at the plane ticket on my kitchen counter. I'm going to Italy to claim what's mine before they can steal it. And I'm going to make sure they understand exactly who they've been underestimating. Maria's voice warmed with something that sounded like admiration. Then you're braver than the rest of us were. Be careful, Mrs. Williams. Andrea doesn't just destroy finances. She destroys lives. And she doesn't give up easily. Neither do I. After hanging up, I looked around the kitchen where I'd cooked 38 years of meals for a man who was planning to betray me. Tomorrow night, I'd be eating dinner in my mother's villa, surrounded by olive trees and the scent of rosemary, protected by documents my mother had hidden away for exactly this moment. My phone buzzed with one final message from Jared. Very disappointed in you, Deanna. We'll discuss this when you get home. I typed back, Yes, we will, but not in the way you think. As I carried my suitcase to the car, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because I was running away from my problems, but because I was finally running toward the truth. By the time Jared and Andrea realized I wasn't coming to their fake meeting, I'd be 35,000 feet in the air, flying toward the only place I'd ever truly felt safe. Tomorrow, in my mother's house, surrounded by 4 centuries of family history, I would discover what she'd left to protect me. And then I would return to Connecticut, ready for the fight of my life. But tonight, for the first time in years, I was going home. The flight to Italy was the longest 12 hours of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on the movie or the book I'd brought. My mind kept racing between rage at Jared's betrayal and anticipation of what my mother had hidden in the villa. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Andrea's voice saying, "Ci liberiamo di lei," and saw Jared's face as he kissed her hand at dinner. I landed in Rome at 6:30 p.m. local time, exhausted but determined. The drive to Montalcino took another 3 hours through winding Tuscan roads that I remembered from childhood visits with my mother. As the sun set behind rolling hills covered with vineyards, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. Giuseppe was waiting for me at the villa, just as he'd promised. He looked exactly as I remembered from my last visit 9 years ago. Weathered face, kind eyes, and hands that spoke of a lifetime working the land. He embraced me in the Italian way, with genuine warmth. Signora Diana, welcome home. Home. Yes, that's exactly what this felt like. The villa looked smaller than my childhood memories, but more beautiful. The stone walls glowed golden in the evening light, and the scent of lavender and rosemary filled the air. My mother's presence was everywhere. In the carefully tended herb garden, the restored shutters painted the exact shade of blue she'd always loved, the lemon trees she'd planted the year I graduated college. You look tired, Signora, Giuseppe said gently. Perhaps we should wait until tomorrow to... No. I surprised myself with the firmness in my voice. I need to see what she left me. Tonight. Giuseppe nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then come. It's in the cellar, behind the wine racks your great-grandfather built. We descended stone steps that were probably centuries old, into a cellar that smelled of earth and aged wine. Giuseppe moved aside several bottles and pressed against a stone that looked identical to all the others. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a space I'd never known existed. Inside was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first item was a letter addressed to me in my mother's elegant handwriting. For Deanna, when she needs to fight for what is ours. The letter was dated just 3 months before her death. My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, it means someone is threatening what I've left you. I pray I am wrong, but I have learned that money and property bring out the worst in people, sometimes even those we love most. The man you married seemed kind when I met him, but I noticed how his eyes changed when we discussed the villa and the vineyard. He asked too many questions about values and ownership laws. A woman learns to recognize that look, cara mia. I have seen it before. In this box, you will find documents that prove the property belongs to you and you alone. Your father signed papers when we divorced, relinquishing any claim to my family's holdings. Jared has no legal right to anything I have given you. But more importantly, I have left you evidence of your great-great-grandmother Julia's wisdom. She faced a similar situation in 1897 when her husband's brother tried to steal our family's land through forged documents. She fought back and won, but she was careful to document everything for future generations. The same tactics they used then are still being used now. Be smarter than they are, Kara. Be patient. Be strong. And remember, this land has survived wars, famines, and countless men who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. It will survive this too, because you are stronger than you know. With all my love and faith in you, Mama. Beneath the letter were legal documents that took my breath away. The original property deeds, going back 5 generations. Copies of Italian court records from 1897, documenting my great-great-grandmother's legal victory over her would-be thieves. And most importantly, a recent assessment from an Italian law firm showing that my properties were worth far more than I'd ever realized. The villa, vineyard, and olive groves were valued at over $3 million, not the $1.8 million that Jared's stolen documents had claimed. But there was more. Mineral rights to a section of land that might contain valuable deposits, water rights that were becoming increasingly precious in Tuscany's changing climate, and historical designations that made the properties eligible for significant tax benefits. No wonder Andrea had targeted me. This wasn't just about inheritance fraud. This was about stealing a small fortune. The last item in the box was a small recording device, obviously vintage, with a note attached. Julia's testimony, recorded by her granddaughter in 1957. Listen and learn. Giuseppe helped me set up the old machine. The voice that emerged was thin with age but strong with conviction, speaking in the Tuscan dialect of my childhood. They thought I was just a foolish woman who would sign whatever papers they put in front of me. But I had learned to read, learned about law, learned to fight. When they came with their lies and their threats, I was ready. I had evidence. I had witnesses. I had the truth. And the truth, cara mia, is stronger than any lie they can tell. I sat in that ancient cellar, surrounded by the wisdom of generations of women who had protected our family's legacy, and felt something shift inside me. The fear and uncertainty of the past weeks crystallized into cold, clear purpose. I wasn't just fighting for property. I was fighting for the survival of something that had endured for centuries. And I had advantages that Jared and Andrea couldn't possibly know about. Giuseppe and I spent the next hour reviewing the documents and discussing strategy. He had contacts at the local courthouse, relationships with lawyers who specialized in international property law, and most importantly, detailed records of every suspicious inquiry about my property over the past year. They've been planning this for a very long time, he said, showing me a log he'd kept of phone calls and visits. But they made one mistake, Signora. They assumed you were like the other American women, isolated from your Italian family history, dependent on your husband for guidance. What's our next step? We make sure the property is legally protected from any fraudulent transfer attempts. I've already spoken with Avvocato Benedetti in Siena. He can have restraining orders filed by tomorrow morning, preventing any sales or transfers without your physical presence and Italian legal representation. My phone, which had been mercifully quiet during the flight, suddenly exploded with notifications. Dozens of missed calls and messages from Jared, each one more frantic than the last. Where are you? This isn't funny anymore. People are asking questions. You need to come home now. I know you're upset, but we can work through this. Your phone is going straight to voicemail. I'm calling the police. And finally, the message that confirmed everything I'd suspected. Andrea says you're trying to sabotage our business deal. She's threatening legal action. Just come home and sign the papers, and we can put this all behind us. Legal action. They were still trying to intimidate me, still assuming I was the helpless woman who'd sat silently at La Bella Vista 3 days ago. I typed back a single message. I'm exactly where I need to be. We'll talk when I return. And Jared? I hope you enjoyed your celebration at the Marriott, because it was your last one. His response came within seconds. What are you talking about? What celebration? I showed the message to Giuseppe, who chuckled. He's pretending he doesn't know what you mean? Of course he is, but that's about to change. I called Avocado Benedetti, even though it was past 10 p.m. Giuseppe had warned him to expect my call at any hour. Signora Williams, his voice was crisp and professional. Giuseppe has explained your situation. I've already begun the preliminary paperwork to protect your properties. But I need to ask, do you have evidence of their intentions to commit fraud? I have recordings of them planning the theft. I have documentation of their previous victims. I have copies of forged documents they intended me to sign. Is that enough? More than enough. With your permission, I'd like to contact the authorities in Connecticut as well. What they're attempting is international fraud, which carries serious penalties in both countries. For a moment I hesitated. Did I really want to destroy Jared's life completely? 38 years of marriage, even a marriage built on lies, wasn't easy to walk away from. Then I remembered Elena Vasquez, dying alone in a nursing home. Margaret Hoffman, losing everything she'd inherited from 4 generations of her family. Ruth Patterson, homeless and dependent on her daughter. Yes, I said firmly. Contact the authorities. They need to be stopped before they destroy anyone else. That night, I slept in my mother's bedroom, in the bed where she'd been born, and where she'd spent her last healthy summer before moving to America permanently. The windows were open, and I could hear the gentle sound of wind through olive trees, the distant bells of the village church, the peaceful quiet of a place that had survived centuries of challenges. For the first time in months, I felt safe. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. Jared's name on the screen, but this time I answered. Deanna, thank God. Where are you? I'm in Italy, Jared, at my mother's villa. The villa you and Andrea were planning to steal from me. Silence. Long, heavy silence. I don't know what you think you heard, but basta, I said quietly in Italian. Enough. Another pause. Then, in a voice I'd never heard before, uncertain and almost frightened. You understand Italian? Fluently. I understood every word you and Andrea said at dinner. Every cruel comment about my appearance. Every detail of your plan to rob me. Every lie you told about loving me. I could hear his breathing, sharp and panicked. Deanna, let me explain. No explanations necessary. I know about Margaret Hoffman, Ruth Patterson, and Elena Vasquez. I know about Andrea's network of property fraudsters. I know about the forged power of attorney documents. I know everything. You don't understand. I was trapped. She was blackmailing me. Stop. My voice was steady as stone. Just stop. The silence stretched between us, filled with 38 years of memories that would never look the same again. The authorities in both countries have been contacted, I continued. My properties are legally protected. Andrea's previous victims have been notified that you're both being investigated. It's over, Jared. What do you want from me? His voice cracked. What can I do to fix this? I looked out the window at olive trees that had grown here for centuries, at stone walls built by my ancestors who'd fought to protect what was theirs, at the land my mother had preserved for me even as she lay dying. You can disappear from my life, I said softly. Completely and permanently. Because the woman you thought you married, the one who would sit quietly while you stole her birthright, never existed. I hung up the phone and turned it off. Tomorrow, I would fly back to Connecticut to begin divorce proceedings and ensure that Andrea faced justice for her crimes. But today, I would walk through my mother's gardens, tend the herbs she'd planted, and begin planning the new life I would build on the foundation she'd left me. The silence that had protected me for so long was finally ready to speak. I spent 3 more days in Italy, working with Avocado Benedetti to ensure my properties were legally bulletproof against any future fraud attempts. But more importantly, I spent those days remembering who I was before I became someone who apologized for taking up space in my own life. The phone calls from Connecticut were relentless. Jared called 17 times the first day after our confrontation, then stopped completely. But Andrea called every few hours, her voice switching between threats and desperate pleading. "Mrs. Williams, you're making a terrible mistake," she said in one message, her Italian accent thicker when she was angry. "Jared owes money to very dangerous people. If you don't help him, something bad might happen to you." I saved every threatening message and forwarded them to both Avocado Benedetti and the FBI agent who'd been assigned to the international fraud case. Andrea was making their job easier with every word. The third day brought news I'd been waiting for. Agent Sarah Martinez called from the Hartford field office with an update that made my hands shake with satisfaction. "Mrs. Williams, we have Andrea Rossi in custody. She was arrested this morning at Kennedy Airport trying to board a flight to Milan using a false passport. We also have evidence that she's wanted by Interpol for similar crimes in France and Germany. What about my husband?" "Jared Williams is cooperating with our investigation. He claims he was coerced into participating, but the evidence suggests otherwise. We found records of payments he received from Andrea's operation going back 8 months. This wasn't a recent seduction, Mrs. Williams. This was a long-term business partnership. 8 months. While I'd been worrying about his health, his stress, his sudden mood changes, he'd been planning to rob me blind. What happens now? Andrea will likely face 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Your husband. That depends on how much he cooperates and what other evidence we uncover. But, Mrs. Williams, you should know that we found a list in Andrea's possession. 12 other American women with Italian inheritances. You probably saved their lives by fighting back." After hanging up, I sat in my mother's garden and cried for the first time since this nightmare began. Not tears of sadness, but of relief so profound it felt like physical pain leaving my body. Giuseppe found me there an hour later, bringing homemade biscotti and strong coffee. "Good news from America?" he asked gently. "Very good news. They arrested Andrea. She'll go to prison for a long time." He nodded with satisfaction. "Your mother would be proud. She always said you had steel in your spine, even when you were a little girl running through these olive trees." "Giuseppe, I need to ask you something. When my mother was dying, did she ever talk about being worried about Jared?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he sighed. "She mentioned him once, near the end. She said he asked too many questions about money, about the property values, about Italian inheritance laws. She said she hoped she was wrong, but..." He shrugged in the Italian way that says more than words. "Why didn't she say anything to me?" What could she say? "Deanna, I think your husband might try to steal your inheritance someday." You would have thought grief was making her paranoid. Instead, she protected you the way she knew how, by making sure you had the tools to protect yourself when the time came. That afternoon, I called my attorney in Connecticut to begin divorce proceedings. I also called a realtor to put our house on the market. Whatever life I was going to build next, it wouldn't include anything that reminded me of 38 years of lies. But the most important call I made was to Maria Vasquez, Elena's daughter. "Mrs. Williams, I've been thinking about you constantly. Are you safe?" "I'm safe, and I have news." Andrea Rossi was arrested this morning. She's going to prison for a very long time. The silence on the other end stretched so long, I thought the connection had dropped. Then I heard crying. "My mother can finally rest," Maria whispered. She died thinking it was somehow her fault, that she should have been smarter, should have seen it coming. But she was just a woman who trusted the wrong person. Your mother wasn't weak, Maria. None of Andrea's victims were. They were targeted because they had something valuable, and they were manipulated by experts. The only difference is that I found out before I signed the papers. What about your husband? He's cooperating with the FBI to reduce his sentence, but our marriage is over. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Are you going to be okay? Financially, I mean? I looked around my mother's villa, at the olive groves that had been producing income for my family for generations, at the vineyard that Benedetti assured me could become quite profitable with proper management. I'm going to be more than okay. I'm going to be free. The flight back to Connecticut was completely different from my panicked journey to Italy. I felt calm, centered, and for the first time in years, excited about my future. I'd made a decision during those quiet days in Tuscany. I wasn't just returning to wrap up the legal mess Jared had created. I was returning to start over completely. The house felt different when I walked in, smaller somehow and filled with the ghosts of conversations that had never been honest. Jared was waiting in the kitchen, looking older than his 65 years. When he saw me, his face crumpled with what looked like genuine remorse. "Deanna, don't." I set my suitcase down but didn't sit. "I don't want explanations or apologies. I want information. The FBI said you've been taking money from Andrea for 8 months. I want to know how long you've been planning this." He couldn't meet my eyes. "It started as just an affair. She approached me at a business conference, said she was attracted to successful older men. I was flattered. You seemed so distant after your mother died, and Andrea made me feel important, desired, worth lying to your wife of 38 years. It wasn't supposed to go this far. She said it would just be some paperwork, that we'd restructure the Italian properties to be more tax efficient. She said you'd never even notice." "And the money you took from her?" His shoulders sagged. "She called them consulting fees. For helping her understand American property laws, for introducing her to other men with wealthy wives. I didn't know about the other victims until you told me." I studied his face, looking for any sign of the man I'd married. "Do you actually believe that? Or is that just the story you're telling yourself to sleep at night?" "I don't know anymore. I don't know what's true and what I convinced myself was true. At least that was honest. The house is going on the market tomorrow," I said. "I'll split the proceeds with you 50-50, which is more generous than you deserve. After that, I don't want to see you again." "Where will you go?" I thought about the villa in Tuscany, about Giuseppe's invitation to help him expand the olive oil business, about the winemaking course offered by the local agricultural college, about all the ways I could spend my remaining years that didn't involve pretending to be smaller than I was. "I'm going home," I said, "to the place where people don't lie to me about who they are. Deanna, please. 38 years has to count for something." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but pity. 38 years would have counted for everything if any of it had been real. "But you've been lying to me so long that I don't think you even know who you actually are anymore." That evening, I called my children to explain what had happened. Both Maria and Tony were shocked but supportive. Maria, my daughter who lived in Boston, immediately offered to help me pack and move. Tony, my son in California, offered to fly out to handle Dad if I needed backup. "I still can't believe it," Maria said. "Dad always seemed so solid, boring even." "Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem harmless," I told her. "They trade on our trust, on our assumption that people are basically good." "Are you going to be okay, Mom? Really okay?" I was sitting in my mother's favorite chair, looking through photo albums from my childhood summers in Italy. Pictures of me at 8, covered in dirt from helping with the olive harvest. Pictures of me at 16, learning to make wine with my grandfather. Pictures of a girl who was confident and strong before life taught her to apologize for taking up space. I'm going to be better than okay, sweetheart. I'm going to remember who I was before I forgot. 3 weeks later, the house sold to the first family who looked at it. Jared received a suspended sentence in exchange for testifying against Andrea and providing information about her network. He moved to a small apartment across town, and I heard through mutual friends that he'd started attending therapy and Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. I hoped he found peace, genuinely, but I also hoped I never saw him again. My last night in Connecticut, I drove to my mother's grave. I'd brought fresh flowers and a letter I'd written in Italian, telling her about the villa, about Giuseppe, about the new life I was building on the foundation she'd left me. "Grazie, Mama," I whispered, placing the flowers on her headstone, "for protecting me even when I didn't know I needed protection, for teaching me that some things are worth fighting for showing me that I was stronger than I knew." The next morning, I boarded a plane to Rome with 2 suitcases, a heart full of hope, and the absolute certainty that I was finally truly going home. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my mother's villa, teaching my first Italian cooking class to a group of American women who'd come to Tuscany to rediscover themselves. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 38 years of my life making myself smaller, quieter, more accommodating, and now I was teaching other women to take up space in the world again. The secret to real ragu, I told my students as I stirred the sauce that had been simmering since dawn, is patience. You can't rush love, and you can't rush tomatoes. The women laughed, but I could see some of them writing down everything I said. They were mostly divorced, mostly over 50, mostly here because they'd realized that the lives they'd been living weren't actually their own. I understood them completely. Giuseppe knocked on the kitchen door, carrying a basket of fresh herbs from the garden. At 72, he was still more energetic than most men half his age, and over the past months he'd become, well, I wasn't quite sure what to call what we'd become. "Scusi, ladies," he said in his charming English, "but Signora Diana, there's someone here to see you." My stomach tightened. Despite all the legal protections we'd put in place, I still tensed when unexpected visitors arrived. The trauma of betrayal doesn't disappear just because the betrayer goes to prison. "Who is it?" "A young woman from America. She says her name is Catherine Morrison, and she needs to speak with you about Andrea Rossi." I excused myself from the cooking class and found Catherine waiting in the garden. She was probably in her early 40s, well-dressed but with the hollow look around her eyes that I recognized from my own mirror during the darkest days with Jared. "Mrs. Williams? I'm Catherine Morrison from Phoenix. I think you saved my life." "I'm sorry?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a news article about Andrea's arrest. "My husband introduced me to an Italian woman named Andrea 3 months ago. Said she was going to help us invest in some property in Tuscany. We were supposed to sign papers next week." Her voice broke. "I was going to sign away my grandmother's inheritance, everything she left me." I led her to a bench under the olive trees where I'd spent so many mornings these past months, drinking coffee and planning my new life. "Tell me what happened." "Richard, my husband, he's been different lately, secretive, always on his phone. He told me he'd met this amazing Italian businesswoman who could help us buy property here, maybe even retire early." She laughed bitterly. It all sounded too good to be true, but I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe we were finally going to have the adventure we'd always talked about. "What made you suspicious?" "Andrea kept pushing for me to sign power of attorney documents to make the process smoother. But something about the way she looked at me. It reminded me of how a cat looks at a mouse. When I saw the news about her arrest, I hired a private investigator to look into Richard's recent activities. She showed me a folder thick with photographs, bank records, and phone logs. Richard Morrison had been in contact with Andrea for over 6 months, had received payments totaling $47,000 from her organization, and had already begun moving his wife's assets into accounts Catherine couldn't access. The private investigator said if you hadn't exposed Andrea when you did, I would have lost everything within the next month. My grandmother's house in Sedona, her stock portfolio, even the small trust fund she set up for my daughter's college education. I felt the familiar surge of anger that came whenever I thought about Andrea's victims. What are you going to do now? I've filed for divorce. I've secured all my assets. And Richard. She smiled grimly. Richard is facing charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. Apparently, the FBI had him under surveillance after Andrea's arrest. Good. You were smart to act quickly. Mrs. Williams, can I ask you something? How do you trust anyone again after something like this? I looked around the garden my mother had planted, at the villa where generations of strong women had made difficult decisions, at Giuseppe tending the herb garden with the quiet contentment of someone who'd found his place in the world. You learn that trust isn't something you give away freely, I said finally. It's something you build carefully with people who prove themselves worthy of it over time. And you learn that the most important person to trust is yourself. Catherine stayed for lunch, and I introduced her to my cooking class students. By the time she left, she had phone numbers for 3 different women who'd rebuilt their lives after devastating betrayals, and an invitation to return to Tuscany whenever she needed a safe place to heal. That evening, Giuseppe and I sat on the terrace overlooking the vineyard, sharing a bottle of wine from grapes we'd harvested ourselves. The sunset painted the rolling hills in shades of gold and purple, and I felt the deep contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. Another happy ending, Giuseppe said, referring to Catherine's visit. I'm not sure it's an ending, I replied. More like a beginning. She'll have hard days ahead, rebuilding her life from scratch. Like you did? I considered this. Yes, but also no. I didn't rebuild the same life I'd had before. I built something completely different. Something that was actually mine. Giuseppe reached for my hand, a gesture that had become natural over the months of working together, cooking together, slowly learning to trust again. Are you happy, Deanna? Really happy? I thought about my old life in Connecticut, the house where I'd walked on eggshells for years without even realizing it. The marriage where I'd made myself smaller and smaller until I was barely visible. The comfortable numbness I'd mistaken for contentment. Then I thought about my current life. The cooking classes that filled my kitchen with laughter. The olive oil business Giuseppe and I were expanding together. The organic garden where I grew herbs that actually tasted like something. The quiet evenings reading Italian poetry by the fireplace. The way I felt when I woke up each morning, excited to see what the day would bring instead of dreading what I'd have to endure. I'm happy in a way I didn't even know was possible, I said. I spent so many years thinking happiness meant avoiding conflict, keeping peace, not asking for too much. I thought if I was just grateful enough for what I had, that would be enough. And now? Now I know that real happiness isn't about avoiding problems. It's about solving them. It's about choosing people who are honest with you, even when the truth is difficult. It's about building a life that's actually yours. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria, my daughter in Boston. Mom, I booked my tickets for Christmas in Tuscany. Can't wait to meet Giuseppe and see your new life. Also, Dad called. He's getting married again, to his therapist. I thought you should know. I showed the message to Giuseppe, who raised his eyebrows. How do you feel about that? He asked carefully. I thought about it for a moment, waiting for jealousy or hurt or some echo of the 38 years I'd spent as Jared's wife. Instead, I felt nothing. No, that wasn't right. I felt relief. I feel sorry for his therapist, I said finally, and grateful that she's not me. Giuseppe laughed, the rich sound mixing with the evening birdsong. You are a remarkable woman, Deanna Castellano. Castellano. I'd legally changed my name back to my mother's family name 6 months ago, shedding the last connection to a life that had never really fit. Hearing Giuseppe say it still sent a little thrill through me, the recognition of who I actually was, not who I'd pretended to be. Giuseppe, can I tell you something? Always. The night I listened to Jared and Andrea planning to steal my inheritance, I felt like I was dying inside. Not just from the betrayal, but from realizing how invisible I'd become in my own life. I'd spent so many years being quiet, being agreeable, being grateful for scraps of attention, that I'd forgotten I was supposed to take up space in the world. He squeezed my hand gently. But you know what I realized sitting here tonight, watching another woman discover her own strength? I wasn't dying in that restaurant. I was being born, the real me, the one who'd been buried under decades of trying to be what other people wanted. And who is the real you? I looked around the terrace where we sat, at the kitchen where I taught women to nourish themselves and others, at the business we were building together based on honesty and mutual respect, at the life I'd created from the ashes of everything I'd lost. The real me is someone who speaks Italian fluently and isn't ashamed of being smart. Someone who can run a business and make decisions and trust her own judgment. Someone who deserves love that doesn't require her to disappear. I turned to face him. Someone who's ready to be happy without apologizing for it. Giuseppe's smile was soft and warm in the fading light. I'm very glad to meet her at last. Later that night, after Giuseppe had gone back to his cottage and I'd cleaned up from the cooking class, I sat in my mother's bedroom writing in the journal I'd started keeping since moving to Italy. The entry for today was simple. Today I helped another woman escape the trap I fell into for so many years. Tomorrow I'll teach 6 more women that they deserve to take up space in their own kitchens, their own lives. Next week, Giuseppe and I will bottle the first wine we made together from our own grapes. I am 63 years old, and I am finally living my life instead of surviving someone else's version of what my life should be. The silence I kept for so long wasn't protecting anyone. It was just keeping the truth from being heard. Now that I've found my voice again, I understand what my great-great-grandmother Julia meant when she said the truth is stronger than any lie. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with forgiveness. This one ends with something better. Freedom. Outside my window, the olive trees rustled in the night breeze, the same trees that had watched over 5 generations of women who'd refused to let anyone steal what belonged to them. I was part of that legacy now, not because of the property I'd inherited, but because of the strength I'd finally claimed as my own. The silence that had hidden my truth for so long had finally learned to speak. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.